Hello, my name is Junius Williams, your host on Everything's Political Podcast. And we're back probably with the ultimate revelation of our most recent topic. What happens with Vote 16 in Newark, New Jersey? Young people, 16 and 17, being able to vote for the first time in the Newark School Board election, which just happened recently in Newark. Newark is one of the few, probably one of the only two large cities that allow this. Oakland, California is the other one, and we're going to talk about Oakland and compare Oakland with Newark in a minute. But let's first, those of you who are sitting on the edge of your chair and you don't know already what had happened, only 71 young people voted. 71 out of 1,842 registrants. Now, somebody did the math and they tell me that's about a little less than 4%. Well, that's good and it's not so good. Glass is half empty, glass is half full, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. For example, that 4% beat the adult population, which was only about 2.8%. So almost 4 versus 2.8. What's happening here? Why don't people want to vote in the school board election? That's the larger question. That's the context. The goal for registration by the Institute, and I'm talking about the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, which was the main sponsor for this litigation, for the legislation that enabled it, and the groups that participated, youth groups, the adult leadership and the youth leadership in certain groups such as the GYM Project and the Youth Media Symposium. The goal for registration was 3,000. 1,842 people were registered, young people, 16 to 17. The registrants since February 1st, 1,700. When you look at it, again, that's not bad. First time, and there were many problems. But the turnout, that could be really bad. But some people think that's good. I think it's good as well. If you put it in the context, let's compare it with Oakland, California. Oakland, California started 8 years ago, and 500 young people voted. About 1/3 of the voting population. So if you look at it in terms of time, it wasn't a bad first time. Why is the time important? Because a lot of things had to happen. First of all, the actual registration and through getting out the vote, all of that really didn't begin until February. February to April, that's not a lot of time to get the young people registered, to get the young people educated, to get them familiar with candidates, to have the candidates familiar with them, to get them familiar with the mechanics of voting, to get them familiar with the places you have to go to vote. That's not very much time. So on my OG cap, taking off my reporter's cap, but reporting this now as an OG who's done many, many, many campaigns, they started too late. This should have been done starting in the summer. And in fact, some of the education programs were done that way. We had I know we did with the Youth Media Symposium because they had classes in the summer, and also with the GYM Project, they had classes. So people were then talking about civics. Young people talking about civics probably for the first time because that's just not a darling subject in this urban community. So they began, but then I said, well, what's happening? I said, well, maybe in September, October, there's going to be an uptick in organization. People are going to start coming out and really examining what it means to vote, maybe even have some trial runs, the way they did in Mississippi when before black folks could vote. They had a trial run vote down for who was going to be the representative. All of that was training, and they took the time and did it before the actual time to go to the Democratic Convention in 1964 in Atlantic City. All of that took place. People knew. People were engaged. This was an organizing moment, and this was an organizer's dream because it was clear. This was the focus as it could have been and should have been in Newark. So to start in February was just wrong. Start in February was too late. And I think people understand that now. Secondly, there was a constant belief that the school district itself would help and do some inordinate help in getting young people registered and facilitating the vote. Well, I don't know why people thought that. I don't know why people thought that. Jesse Jackson said, you can't ride to freedom on Pharaoh's chariot. Maybe some of you don't remember that Pharaoh was a guy who was keeping the Jews enslaved in Egypt, and how did they get free? Well, they just had to go do it themselves. You can't depend on somebody else to do your voting or to do your organizing, to do your participation in this electoral process. People say, well, they should have done more to let us register folks. Folks couldn't get into the school to register. Well, you didn't have to be in the school to get registered because you could register folks online. Therein lies one of the problems. Folks were too dependent upon the people in the school district staff itself to make it easier for people to vote. Well, we should have been able to vote in the schools. Well, maybe, but that's a state law, city law, by city mandate, as to where the polling places will be. People don't vote in the schools unless there's a regularly outlined and determined voting place. So that means you got to be ready to go somewhere else if necessary. Young people, this was your first time. We understand there are going to be some problems like that. This is all meant to help you. If you're listening, you got to find out where these places are in advance so that you can make sure your constituents get to the right place at the right time. Third issue, the use of social media. Social media, that's always been a double-edged sword when it comes to social justice issues. And voting is a social justice issue. I see social media as a vital part of today's movements to get things done, to get things changed. This comes under that whole umbrella of changing the way things were. And young people know how to use social media. I heard from one of the folks who was involved that was a particular piece that was done with young people or a young person talking about how proud they were to vote and being able to participate, and over 15,000 people listened to it. The question is, how do you translate that 15,000 folks who listened to it into boots on the ground, folks going to those polling places and filing their vote? I have no answer for that. But it all comes under the banner of something called hoopla. Hoopla, hoopla. That's the first thing you do when you're running somebody. I know about hoopla, putting on my OG hat again. I know about hoopla. You got to get folks excited about the election. You got to get them excited about the candidates. You got to get them knowledgeable about the issues, but excited about the issue. All of that comes along with getting your constituents out to vote. I don't know what the real issues were in this campaign. Who decided what the main issues were, and who were the candidates who most addressed and agreed with those issues? There were some. There were some. One of the issues that people talked about the most: food services. Also, the question of some things were questioned about the actual way things were taught and some of the curriculum. But I did not hear a set pattern. I did not hear a set drumbeat about the issues, so much so that it would attract the young people you're trying to get to vote. Now we got to talk about the actual acceptance of voting as a part of the culture of Newark. That was raised in one of the sessions that took place afterwards. The voting culture in Newark, as exemplified by the parents, carries over to the young people. And this is a national phenomenon. Black people and young people as well fit into this. They're not accustomed to power. They're not accustomed to power. People are willing to do what's necessary to get something called freedom on a situational basis. If the police charge in and beat somebody up, yes, people can get aroused. But that's not always about power. Power has its own language. And how do you turn people onto that notion that you can change things, especially through the vote? Well, some folks who were turned on were those people in those organizations, the GEM Project, the Abbott Leadership Institute Youth Media Symposium, and then other organizations in the city joined in, the South Ward organization, South Ward Community Coalition. They had people coming out to vote. Then there were other people who tried to vote, but things happened. And here we go back to the mechanics of how you run an organization. Some people were registered. Some people did register, but when they got to the polling station, there was no record. Well, here's where your organization comes in, because every time you register somebody, you need to make a copy of it, so that situations like this, when they arise, your representative comes in and say, hey, I got a copy here. So-and-so did register. So then they can vote a provisional ballot. And when they can prove later on that their votes, so that they can prove later on that they did in fact register, that they were legal voters, that means they were of age and lived in the city of Newark, then you should be able to vote. So if they were legally entitled to vote, they should have been able to vote a provisional ballot until the issue was necessarily resolved. Then that vote would go in. So there were more people than 71 who tried to vote. Then there were some people, I understand, who were not of age, tried to register, but then they said on the spot, somebody told them from some of the participating organizations, well, you can't register, but do you know other people who can? And they in turn referred the activists to some other young people who did in fact register. So you see, there was interest in this election. Not enough, because some people, even on the day that it happened, said, I don't know what's going on. Then there were people who had other activities. And they didn't want to sacrifice those activities to take the time to go vote. Some people didn't know where to go to vote. This all comes under the heading of the big topic called Get Out the Vote, GOTV. You need to have somebody who understands how to do that working for the campaign. There are folks like me who've done it long time ago, but then there are younger people who do it all the time because that's how the mayor gets elected. That's how the council people get elected. GOTV. What does that mean? On the day of the election, there's a group of people who are situated with telephones and computers nowadays who, when their runners go into the polls, maybe an hour before the polls close, the poll workers say, okay, here's a list of people who voted. You go back and compare that with your list of people that you know are registered and voting in that particular district. If you see that Jane and Harry are registered but did not vote, you pick up the phone and you call them. You find them some kind of way. You send people to their house. You find out where they are. Mama says, well, they're still playing volleyball. We'll go get them. You have to have cards at your disposal. You call them up. You say, hey, did you vote? No, I didn't vote. Why didn't you vote? Well, I don't have a way to get there. You send that same car over to pick them up. I don't know where to vote. You take them to where they vote. Well, I got to go to volleyball practice. No, you can't go today until you vote. We'll take you to the polls. You vote. We'll bring you back to volleyball practice. That's how it's done. I suggest that if there had been a GOTV approach, which again is organizational, then there would have been hundreds of more young people who did come to the polls. In that context, I'm hopeful because this was the first year. This was the first year. We have to just obey some of those time-honored principles about organizations, starting in the summer, getting people together. Now there are two young men who understand that you need organization, and you just can't keep talking about individuals. There are two young men who understand that. One has been on this program, and his name is Nathan Dugan. We talked to him about his organization, the Young Voters Association. And the other one I met post-election who's called Emmanuel Adiola. I'm going to try to get both of them on to talk about their ideas for organization. I said that was the last point I wanted to make about getting out the vote, but if you're going to have something that starts in September, or rather in the summer and eases on into September when school opens up, then you need to have something that's going to go forth and carry on the business of organizing. Emmanuel's organization is called the Newark Youth for Accountability. Is there room for two such organizations in Newark? Well, I don't know. Maybe they can combine forces. We're going to find out. I'm going to try to see if we can get them to talk to each other. And they're going to be doing some of the things that I've already set forth here. They have a preliminary agenda. I suggest that the idea of voting can't just be romanticized based on duty, but based on concepts of power. Final observation. Looking at the fact that there were almost 4% of the voters who did come out voting public now, including the 16 and 17-year-olds. Looking at the fact that youth vote total almost 4%, and the adult vote only total 2.8%, it doesn't take a genius to figure out if the young people had organized, knew what their issues were, had their own candidates or identified candidates to work in coalition with, that they could have voted in 3 people. The culture of power, young people, you got to understand and become familiar with that and feel comfortable with it, which is a function of organization. So I'm through. As an OG, I owe that to you, and I owe that to the people who are out there who may be listening and watching this. This thing can be done. I'm very impressed that there are still young people out there who are doing what we used to do back in the day, and they haven't stopped. They're going to continue. They're going to continue to work in Newark, and then there's others. There are young people working in Jersey City that want to be the next city. Then there are people who saying, well, we need to do this statewide. And there are people who are saying, well, we need to do this nationwide, who are saying we need to bring in a new group of people, ages 16 and 17, because what they see is a world based on what's within their lens. And we need to support them. So, until later, thank you all for tuning in. Let's move on down the road. Let's see what the end's going to bring. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Everything's Political podcast is produced by the Center for Education and Juvenile Justice Incorporated. The narrator and chief consultant on the project is Junius Williams. The cinematographer for Series 5 is Brian Timmons, and the editor, Harry Kafka, Studio Mosaic, under Francesca Dulce Larson, manages additional production and promotional efforts. We wish to thank the Turrell Foundation for its continued generous contributions that make the podcast possible. You can catch new episodes monthly and bonus content released weekly across YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. If you like what you see, please like, follow, and subscribe, and of course, stay political.